Welcome to Haunted Talks, the official podcast of the Haunted Walk, offering ghost tours and paranormal adventures in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto, Ontario. My name is Jim Dean. I am the creative director, and we really appreciate you joining us for today's episode. I believe the most compelling hauntings meet 4 criteria. There needs to be a substantial amount of activity. There needs to be a wide variety of eyewitnesses. There needs to be documentation. And finally, and most importantly to some, it needs to be scary as hell. The Sallie House Haunting, which took place over 20 months in 1993 to 1994, easily meets all 4 of these criteria, and then some. So get out your candles, turn out the lights, and cuddle in close. This is the kind of story that will keep you up at night. But before we get to that, I did want to give you an update on our Save Halloween Project Kickstarter. Thank you to all of those out there who were backers. I know I heard from several of you, and we appreciated all the support. Sadly, we didn't quite meet our very ambitious $25,000 target. But because we had so many backers, and a lot of interest in particular about our virtual haunted campfires, we've decided to continue the project on our own website. Our virtual campfires will include storytellers from around the world, so that during the month of October, we can ensure that everyone, no matter what is happening in the world, we have a forum to share some great ghost stories and help support other haunted creators and storytellers. If you're interested in supporting the project and getting one of our awesome haunted hoodies, please go to our website, hauntedwalk.com. From there, you can click on our gift shop, which will take you to our Shopify page, and from there, just click on the Save Halloween Project. I'd also like to mention our bubble tours are currently running in Kingston, Ottawa, and Toronto. These are premium small group experiences with no more than 12 people from no more than 3 social circles. So very small groups, and it's a great opportunity to get out, enjoy the weather, and hear some great ghost stories. So if you're in or going to be visiting Kingston, Ottawa, or Toronto, we'd love to have you out on tour. And information about the tours and to purchase tickets, you can visit our website, hauntedwalk.com. Please be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all 3 at Haunted Walk. And be sure to subscribe to the show if you haven't done so already, so you know when the new episodes are coming out. And if you're enjoying the show, a 5-star review is a great way to let us know you're out there and you're enjoying what we're doing. In 1993, expecting parents Deb and Tony Pickman moved into a rental property in Atchison, Kansas. The 2-story home was built in 1872 for the family of a local doctor. From its exterior, it looked deceptively small. Inside, it was rather spacious, boasting 3 good-sized bedrooms, 1.5 baths upstairs, and a spacious and open floor plan. What is so unique about this case is that Deb Pickman was taking notes throughout the haunting, and in fact, she has published a book based on her notes called Sallie House Haunting, a true story by Deborah Pickman. Deb writes, "We had our first look at the place in mid-December. The feeling in the house was comforting and calm. It had plenty of room for our family and seemed perfect. With the help of family and friends, we moved in on New Year's Eve, 1992. For the first month or so, all seemed well. The first thing the couple began to notice was when they were watching TV in the living room, the overhead light would sporadically become very dim, and then minutes later would suddenly burst out to its full wattage. Bulbs were changed, fuses were replaced, and they even had an electrician over to investigate, who found no answers. The lights continued to flicker until one night when Tony said, "Maybe we have a ghost." After that particular activity stopped. The following days held other and more strange activity. Tony found one of the cats sitting outside of the nursery, hissing into the empty room. Deb began to regularly feel cold air rushing past her, particularly as she was moving up or down the stairs. Very late one evening, while she was in bed, she was awoken to a blood-curdling scream. Thinking that her life was in danger due to a screaming intruder in her house, she quickly tried to get out of bed, when she felt something very heavy strike her face and body. She was now the one screaming at the top of her lungs. The unusual activity in the house became more obvious after the birth of the Pickman son, Taylor. One evening, after returning home, the family discovered that the stuffed animals in the nursery had changed positions. As Deb describes it, all of the stuffed animals had been neatly placed in a circle with their backs to each other on the floor in the middle of the room. We were sure that someone had played a trick on us. Trying to be logical about the situation, we thought briefly about whether the wind or the cats might have knocked the bears to the floor. But all the windows were closed, and neither of these explanations would account for how all the bears were so neatly positioned. The three of us stood there for the longest time, just shifting, our eyes around the room and looking at each other. I checked the bears for any sort of magnet or anomaly within the soft cushioning to see if there may have been some other explanation. I thought I might find transparent strings or fishing lines attached to them, but none were found. After exhausting our list of logical possibilities for the strange occurrences, we decided to call my sister Jeannie, since she had been the last person in the house. As I dialed the number, I wondered if the toys were already on the floor when she was there. She said they weren't, and added she felt very uncomfortable in the house. For the family, there were only two options. Either someone came into the house and set up the creepy display for reasons unknown in the 30 minutes or so the family were away, or this was something paranormal. Not only that, but the family speculated that it could be the spirit of a child, given it seemed to enjoy spending time in the nursery and playing with the stuffed animals. This assumption was only reinforced in the coming days, as one teddy bear in particular was found lying on the floor in the middle of the room several times, despite being moved back to the wicker chair that it had sat in undisturbed for months before the discoveries. With these unexplainable events happening, the family tried to contact former residents to see if they too had experienced anything unusual. One reported that she would often smell something odd or foul in the house. She also said that her young son had slept in the corner bedroom, now the nursery. She went on to say that she was always picking up his toys and reprimanding him for not putting them away, and the boy would always protest his innocence. The mother had chalked it up to the typical fibs of a child not wanting to be responsible for picking up his toys. She added that her daughter had the bedroom with the walk-in closet. She hadn't remembered anything strange about the room, with one exception. She remembered her little girl had not only grown very attached to an imaginary playmate named Sallie, but would entertain herself for hours, playing with her in the closet. Remarkably, the little girl had not spoken of Sallie since moving away. Could Sallie be the playful poltergeist? The stuffed animals were not the only objects that were being affected. A framed photo of Deb and Tony was ominously found hanging upside down on the wall. It was perhaps a troubling sign of things to come. Shortly afterward, as the family was preparing for an outing, tensions were running a little high. As Tony carried Taylor in his car seat toward their vehicle, Tony suddenly yelled out in pain. When Deb lifted his shirt and inspected the area, she found 3 bleeding scratch marks, each 5 or 6 inches long, running down the center of his back. At this point, the family grew very concerned. A playful and innocent ghost is one thing, but something that is willing to hurt the family was another thing entirely. The family was put in touch by phone with psychic Barbara Connor, who plays a major and somewhat troubling role in the rest of the story. She reinforced to the family the idea that the spirit was in fact young Sallie, and that the spirit had been trying to protect the baby and had misread the stress of the day as being a danger to the child. Connor suggested that they engage with Sallie like they would any other child, set firm boundaries, provide discipline when they are crossed, and most of all, acknowledge her presence and seek to include her in family activities. This begins a very unusual relationship between Deb and the entity in particular. She begins talking to Sallie regularly and performs little experiments trying to engage with the spirit. In reading Deb's book, as so many of the family's actions become based on the emotional considerations of this ghost child, you get the sense that she developed a real maternal bond with Sallie, almost as if she was another one of their children. As the relationship grew, so did Deb's desire to figure out exactly who Sallie was. But in the end, countless hours of research did not provide any answers. They never found a child with the name Sallie who ever lived in the house, much less who had died there. The intensity of the situation soon increased when Tony discovered decorative candles that the family never used, lit and burning in the bathroom. After blowing them out and looking at the wax, they guessed they could not have been burning for more than 10 minutes, a time over which the family had a clear view of the bathroom door, and they knew that no one had come in or out during that time. Deb scolded Sallie firmly and wasted no time in telling her that lighting fires was not a good thing to do. It was dangerous, could easily get out of control, and burn the whole house down. She explained if there was no house, she would have no place to stay either. This unwelcome activity prompted the family to invite psychic Barbara Connor to come visit the home for herself, to see if she could offer any help or insights. As she was walking around the house, she held out her right hand, rubbing her palm. "Has anyone hurt their hand?" she asked. No one responded. Okay, Connor said. She went on, "She's got a toothache and a bad pain in her hand. She probably died with these pains. They could connect with how she died. Maybe she had been treated by the doctor who had owned the house. Maybe she had liked him and followed him home. Whatever the reason, she likes it here." Deb asked whether Sallie was in the bedroom with them when they slept, and Connor answered with a definite yes. Then she stressed that the baby should continue to sleep in the same room with the parents for as long as possible, or until Sallie was better acquainted with what was right and what was wrong. While walking down the stairs, Connor said, she runs up and down these stairs a lot. Turning to Deb, "You probably feel it more because she's around you more." While the rest of the group headed downstairs, Tony remained a few steps behind. He now had a 35mm camera, and as he got to the bottom of the stairs, he had a strange feeling that something or someone was behind him. Connor instructed him to take a picture, aiming it toward the top of the stairs. The photos on the roll weren't developed until almost a week later, and when they were, they showed a large gray mass of murky color hovering over the stairs. When shared with Connor, she felt that the anomaly was Sallie, standing on the stairs, hand on the railing, in a stance of protection, so that no one but the family would enter what she perceived to be a private area of the home. Deb continued various experiments to try to make direct contact with Sallie. She would leave out papers and crayons in the nursery, and every day she would write a question with a different colored crayon on the page. She even tried to entice Sallie's participation by telling her that she would proudly display her artwork or answer on the refrigerator. For quite some time, there was no response, until one day when Deb had left out a green crayon. In distinct childlike scrawl was written what appeared to be the number 7 and the word like. Could Sallie have been 7 years old and liked the green crayon? That was the only answer Deb ever got using that method. But she did continue to look and would routinely carry around a camera to take photographs throughout the house. Many of the images she captured were bizarre and frightening. They included strange light sources, dark figures, and ominous and imposing blue swirls of darkness. Deb decided that perhaps Sallie wanted a doll of her own that she could play with. So she brought a new one, wrapped it up in gift wrap, and left it in the nursery. For days, it sat there. Then, one day as Deb walked by the room, she saw the brand new baby doll was out of the box and laying in the center of Taylor's crib. The package and the wrappings, however, were undisturbed, and as far as she could see, the gift remained unopened in the corner. Deb carefully opened the box and found it was completely empty, except for the cardboard support that once held the doll. The box had certainly been opened in some manner, as the flaps showed signs of being opened and closed again. One could only assume that the gift wrapping would have to be opened too, but this was not the case. The wrapping paper looked untouched, the tape undisturbed. She tried to carefully take the tape off, but the paper it was attached to tore, as expected. Not too long after, Deb and Tony had a big family gathering at their place, and others were eager to see Sallie in action for themselves. Deb writes, "We brought everyone up to the nursery and asked Sallie to show off, but nothing happened. Everyone was getting rather restless, so I directed my thoughts to forcing her into a reaction. Knowing that she didn't like strangers upstairs, I told her that if she showed off for us once, we would leave the room. I felt bad that I had to bribe her, but I knew chances were good I'd get a reaction. I wanted the non-believers to witness what we had been telling them about." After about a minute or so, the hallway light suddenly went off. No one had been standing near the light switch. As each person checked the person next to them for any signs of trickery, the light in the hall came back on. 2 seconds later, the light in the nursery went out. Then it came back on. Our guests saw what they needed to see, and although many did not know how to respond, some simply took a deep breath and stated they had seen enough. A few thanked Sallie, and I kept my promise and shuffled everyone out of the nursery and down the stairs. And I told her she was a good girl and turned the light off before I left the room myself. Not long after, Tony found some damp laundry sitting in front of the dryer. Believing his wife, in a hurry, had forgotten to throw it back in after taking something out, he threw the damp clothes back inside and started the cycle. He immediately heard a loud thumping noise, but ignored it, thinking somewhere in the load was a pair of tennis shoes or some other moderately heavy object. He played a little with the baby and turned on the stereo in the living room and headed to the front closet for the vacuum. He'd only taken a few steps before the music from the stereo abruptly stopped. As Deb writes, he went back to find it had been turned off, and he turned it back on. A few steps towards the closet, and the music stopped again. Having gone through this many times before, he resolved to just leave it off rather than play the on-off game with an ornery little spirit. Having retrieved the vacuum, he plugged it in and turned it on. It wasn't but a second later that it turned off. He turned it back on, and he could make one step forward before it was off again. He became quite aggravated at this point at what he thought was Sallie being extremely mischievous. He told me later he must have turned it back on at least 6 times before getting so mad he yelled out loud, "God damn it, Sallie, knock it off already." At one point, he even watched the toggle switch flip back to the off position on its own accord. Eventually, he was able to finish his vacuuming without any further interference. The rest of the afternoon was quiet and uneventful. Later, when Deb began to fold the laundry, she noticed that a piece of clothing was splattered with brown spots. She robotically stepped backwards and began to scream, "No, no, no." She knew what had happened, and then suddenly, Tony knew as well. One of the cats had apparently crawled into the dryer to cuddle and sleep among the warm clothes. Tony, not realizing this, had simply thrown the damp clothes back into the dryer on top of her, shutting the door and setting it for the usual 90-minute cycle. Had Sallie been trying to warn him about what he had done? Coincidental or not, Tony saw the spirit for the first time on Halloween morning. He had just poured himself a glass of orange juice when he turned to find a young girl standing in the middle of his kitchen. Her hair was neatly fastened on top of her curly brown hair with a ribbon and a large fancy bow. She looked to be in her Sunday best, but the style was old-fashioned, white eyelet lace and puffy sleeves. She had sweetly round cherub cheeks. She stood there, shocked, curious, and motionless, staring at him wide-eyed. The glass slipped from Tony's hand and hit the floor. When he looked back up, the little girl was gone without a sound. He immediately searched the rest of the house, but could not find her. And he could not believe how real she looked, no different than a regular person. After discussing her appearance, Tony and Deb agreed that this little girl didn't seem like the kind of child that would do all the things they had witnessed. She didn't look rebellious, ornery, or mischievous. How could this sweet-looking child possibly be mean enough to have scratched Tony or started fires? The next incident in the home really ties in well to our last episode, which was on the iconic TV show Unsolved Mysteries. The family had taken an interest in the show based upon their own unique experiences and would often watch it. When the family observed an 8-inch flame coming out of the heads of one of the stuffed animals, they realized they had seen the exact same thing on a recent episode of the show, which raised a really interesting question that I don't think I've ever heard brought up before. If Sallie was watching TV with the family every night, Could what she be seeing influence her behavior? Was she inspired by an Unsolved Mysteries episode? The troubling fires continued, and as a family Christmas party was winding down at the home, the smoke alarm suddenly began to blare. A homemade doll, positioned halfway up the stairs, had burst into flames. On the way out the door, an aunt suggested that Sallie probably felt left out because she didn't get any gifts. On Christmas Eve, the family made a big show to include Sallie. Including when a friend dressed as Santa came to visit, the family took photos with their son, Taylor, on one of Santa's knees, while he wrapped his arm around an invisible child, apparently sitting on his other knee. As Deb writes, in 3 of the photos, there were 2 distinctly different anomalies. One is a grayish mass, the other a cloudy-looking blur of lights. These visuals certainly confirmed, to Deb at least, what Tony had known for a little while. There was more than one spirit in the house. As the family approached the 1-year anniversary since they moved in, it was clear the activity was increasing and becoming more terrifying. And it seemed more and more to be focused on Tony. He reported a strange dream in which he felt he was being pulled out of their bed by his wrists by an unseen attacker. Later that day, Tony began to feel a persistent pain in his wrists. When he unbuttoned his shirt sleeves, he found red and blistered welts on the inside of each wrist. Blisters were in the shape of a child's hand and fingertips. Tony also began to see a dark adult female figure moving around the house, always just out of the corner of his eye. On one occasion, though, he even heard a female voice saying his name. This female presence seemed nothing like Sallie. In one of the most shocking encounters, while Tony was lying on the waterbed, he observed what he thought were specks of dust through the sunlight coming through the blinds. Suddenly, the mattress began to roll and wave, eventually becoming violent enough as if someone was jumping up and down on it. As Tony struggled to keep his bearings, the formation of dust particles near the foot of the bed began to get darker and denser. It had taken the shape of a woman's upper torso, her arms folded in front of her and across her abdomen. The thing started to move closer to Tony, and as it did, he could make out more details, like dark hair and a very stern look on her face, like the store owner's wife on Little House on the Prairie. As she got closer, he could see she was dressed all in black, with a high collar adorned with a brooch. At that point, the water in the baffle of the mattress was frantically sloshing, and it got so violent that he was barely able to move away and toward the other side of the bed. The bedroom door slammed shut. The drawer on the nightstand flung itself open and closed repeatedly, and the top of the highboy spun around. He described it like being in a science fiction movie, and the woman's hand suddenly lunged for his face, and he heard a voice say, "I'm gonna..." There was more, but he couldn't make it out. He remembered her hand was covered in a long black lace glove, and it was just inches from his face, when he saw a black bird on her finger. He struggled to crawl out of bed and over to the door, and he didn't know if he was just too scared to work the knob properly or what, but he couldn't get the door open. Then suddenly, everything that was moving stopped, and she was gone. With so much activity in the home, in front of so many witnesses, it is not too surprising that the word began to spread, and right around this time, the Pickmans began to be contacted by paranormal-themed television shows. and after much discussion and consideration, they agreed to have a crew from the show Sightings come and investigate their home. Sightings ran throughout the 1990s and covered topics like UFOs, Bigfoot, and of course, the paranormal. While the crew was at the house filming, Tony received 3 bloody scratches across his left tricep as he held the baby, and subsequently scratches across his stomach. As Deb writes, the camera continued to roll for about 9 minutes while his scratch formed. The raw footage ended up being touted as groundbreaking video, the first known paranormal activity actually caught on camera. Weeks later, the same raw footage would be reviewed and examined by world-renowned parapsychologist Carrie Gaynor, lead investigator on the cases that inspired the Entity and Poltergeist. After extensively examining the field tape, he gave it merit as an intriguing phenomenon, called it frightening. He seemed especially excited by the fact the camera had not pulled away from the scratches for the entire 9 minutes, but cautioned further study and investigation was required. After it aired, the story was an immediate sensation on Sightings, and they returned to the house several times for additional episodes as the attacks on Tony appeared to continue to escalate. No matter how much equipment they brought in and how closely they monitored Tony, the scratches continued without any reasonable explanation. After one of the airings, the family was contacted by a Native American woman who offered to perform a cleansing on the house. They watched as she smudged and burned sage throughout the house and offered prayers. As Deb writes, at one point, she was able to sense an older gentleman. He had apparently been there in the house for quite some time, unbeknownst to us. She described him as a perfect gentleman. She also became aware of a woman hiding from us. She told us that the two needed to go to cross over into the light. Before long, she described a seemingly frightened young girl in the corner of the nursery. I knew this was Sallie and felt bad that she was so scared. The medium asked if we wanted Sallie to go with the others. I was unsure how to answer this. On one hand, I felt there was probably a better place waiting for Sallie on the other side. On the other hand, I didn't want to make her leave, since she seemed so needy and so comfortable with our family. When I voiced this dilemma, we were given the option to let her stay for now. If we ever wanted her to go, she could be removed another time. Tony and I agreed to let her stay, and the medium invited her into our circle. Strangely enough, I felt the cool sense of her energy and her presence in my lap. We then went through the process of visualizing a white light in all the different rooms of the house. The process took about 6 to 8 minutes per room. Somewhere in between filling the rooms with light, the medium helped the man cross over. He didn't understand why he had to go, but he went just the same. The female figure presented more of a challenge. She was stubborn and refused to leave. We spent quite a while working on her and trying to move the light into the master bedroom. All the while, the medium seemed to be having a turbulent time convincing her and then demanding that this woman leave the house. Eventually, it seemed to work. For a short time, at least. Not long after, on a weekend afternoon, Tony was napping on the couch. Without warning, he suddenly sat up. He then looked directly at Deb and in a strange voice said, "He's mine." Then he simply lay back down and remained quiet for some time. Deb at first thought he was talking in his sleep, but then wondered if the message was actually for her. Was something claiming her husband? Tony's behavior continued to become more odd. He phoned Deb at work one day and suggested it was time for them to move because it felt like someone was going to get hurt. And he thought that someone was going to be Deb. In another very disturbing incident, Tony was eating a bowl of cereal and turned away briefly to look back and find a neighborhood cat had somehow gotten in and was drinking out of his bowl. Immediately overcome with blinding rage, he grabbed a knife and stabbed the cat. He remembers being very proud of the act, Deb writes. Without a care in the world, he went to the living room and sat on the couch, his feelings turning more hateful and wretched. I'll just stab her too, he thought. His thoughts continued to reinforce his mood. I just can't stand the way she looks at me. It's her fault we're here. I can't stand her nagging. I can't stand to look at her. Eventually, he had made detailed plans to kill me upon my return. If she walks by me, I'm going to slit her throat. He remained in this state all morning, with the dead cat in the kitchen. At some point, in the early afternoon, he went upstairs to dress for the day and eventually left the house to pick up Taylor, who was staying with Tony's parents. He returned a few hours later, feeling much more like himself. He cleaned up the dead cat so Deb wouldn't see it and thought, oh God, what was I thinking? Shortly before the family moved out, and after Tony had almost been pushed over a banister by unseen hands, a priest had planned a trip to visit the house. He also talked about doing a blessing, but before any of that could take place, the priest suddenly died. We'll never know if the timing of his death had anything to do with what was happening in the house. On Halloween Day, 1994, the family moved out and into another rental property several blocks away. Afterward, due to its notoriety, the owner of the home began renting it out to paranormal investigation teams and offering public investigations. In 2016, the owner attempted to sell the home for $1 million, but ended up reducing the price to $500,000 before eventually taking it off the market in 2017. On their website, Deb and Tony Pickman recommend that no one should enter the home, and investigators may be risking far more than they bargained for. Despite these warnings, many teams continue to investigate the property, and if you jump on YouTube, you can certainly find several investigations. I think to conclude this story, it is only fair to give Deb the final word. Today, we have no doubt that there was and is a demonic force in that house. This force knows how to play on our fears, anxieties, and desires. And it is utterly amazing that through all of this, Tony and I did not divorce. Those 20 months have been and remain the most confusing times of our life. Over the years, Tony has told many people that he's torn in regarding the spirits he encountered there. On one hand, he felt that there may be human spirits in the house. On the other hand, he also knows that demons appear to us as what they want us to see. All along, he felt this had been the case. First, it had appeared as an innocent and harmless little girl. Then it progressively tried other things to gain our acceptance. He now believes it was all just bait, a way for him to voluntarily allow it in. Thank you so much for joining us for the episode. I do need to mention that as I did that final line there, there was a huge bolt of lightning outside my window and a roll of thunder, which was an absolute perfect way to end the episode. I'm not sure if the microphone will pick it up, but it seemed incredibly well timed. If you're interested in taking one of our bubble tours in Toronto, Ottawa, or Kingston, or finding out more about our Save Halloween project, please visit our website, which is hauntedwalk.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, all three at Haunted Walk. And be sure to subscribe to the show if you have not done so already, and we always appreciate getting a 5-star review wherever you listen to us. As always, thank you to our hard-working Haunted Talks team, including Michelle Dennis, our outstanding audio editor, and Kevin McLeod at Incompetech.com for the additional music. Until we meet again, sweet dreams.